I'll start with a karakia, and I'm Joanna Santa Barbara, co-chair of Nelson Tasman Climate Forum. And this karakia says that present generations who have risen up, people committed to the cause, retain and uphold the ways of nature for the benefit and survival of the entire world. E ngā moko puna, kua ara ake rā, te hunga ki te kaupapa. Huritia ngā tikanga o te taiao e. Hei oranga mo te ao huri noa. A big welcome to everyone, and especially to the wonderful team of speakers who'll be introduced very shortly. I'm just saying a few words to frame this as part of the Climate Action Week of Nelson Tasman Climate Forum. And the forum exists to bring people together to work urgently on climate change. And we've had a very busy week with 30 events covering many different aspects of climate work. But I've found myself particularly looking forward to this one, which I'll now hand over to Magda to describe what's ahead of you.
Thank you, Joanna. Kia ora koutou, ko Magdalena Garbarczyk ahau, e noho ana au ki Whakatū. My name is Magda, I live in Nelson, and I'm a director at Fineline Architecture and a co-founding member of Nelson Tasman 2050. NT 2050 is a group of built environment professionals focused on advocating, promoting, and supporting a transition to a more sustainable and vibrant region. When Joanna suggested that we participate in the Climate Action Week and maybe share some of the work I've been involved with both at Fineline Architecture and NT 2050, I actually thought it might be more valuable to talk about the wider umbrella under which I work, which in essence is regenerative development. And one of the fundamentals of regeneration is the belief that everything is nested within something bigger, forming a large, complex living system. Regeneration also happens at very different scales, and it's not something that anyone does on their own. So it made sense to include other voices to bring a more diverse image of what urban regeneration can look like through the lens of different people, experiences, and projects. So we have today Damaris Kingdon, who is co-faculty with Regenesis Institute and regenerative practice consultant for urban community development in Tamaki Makaurau. Damaris and I trained together in regenerative development and design in 2018 and worked together on a number of projects of various scales since. Damaris has a gift for making the complexity of regeneration easily accessible, and she will be covering the fundamentals of regeneration shortly. After that, I'll briefly talk about why we seriously need regenerative thinking in the planning and development strategies of our Nelson Tasman region. And finally, we'll have Annie Pokel, who's the Nelson Arts Festival Head of Creative and Communications, and Katie Pascoe, who's the Viewfinder Director and artist, who will present their beautiful Heartwood project, which is, in my view, a symbolic and inspiring example of how regeneration can start within an urban environment. So thank you very much again, Joanna, and thank you to the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum for inviting us to present. And I'll pass it now to Damaris.
Kia ora, Magda, and thank you, Joanna, for that warm welcome and introduction. It's really great to be here today, and just to repeat, in case you didn't hear me, my introduction previously, my name is Damaris Kingdon. It's a little unusual, Maris meaning sea, Da meaning of, so if you can imagine that my name means ocean, and Kingdon meaning kingdom, so Ocean Kingdom for you today. A little bit of background, my current work is with the Regenesis Institute, delivering regenerative development education here in Aotearoa, And this is in partnership with the Aiatanga Trust, which is currently located in Auckland. I've had the privilege of working on a number of urban community development projects, including community co-designs in central Auckland, sponsored by Whakatū. And these were part of the Innovating Streets for People projects, which some of you may have encountered before, some more successful than others. But in this case, I had the privilege of working with Magda, and one of these, based in Emily Place in the city centre of Auckland, I'm delighted to say won the Trophy for Change Award out of all the Auckland projects. Something which we can happily say was not due to our intelligence and design brilliance, but rather the success of the project came out of the collective intelligence and care of the community that lives and works there, which ties into what Magda was saying. Regeneration is not something that we do on our own, but it's something that we do together. And this is something that I'd really like to lift up as your facilitator today. Effective urban regeneration is not going to be the domain of developers relying on a few experts, but it's going to be rather the result of professionals and communities working together collaboratively. And we need to do this in a way that aligns with the patterns of nature so that our land and people can thrive together. And I want to acknowledge the immense experience that everyone who's joined us today is bringing with you. We look forward to each of you sharing with us and with one another and the interactive aspects of our session today. And this is going to increase the value of our time. Just in regards to Zoom etiquette, I also want to make a note about the chat function on Zoom. We are requesting that you refrain from creating side dialogue in the chat. And this is so that we can all stay connected with what is being shared by our presenters. In terms of questions that arise, as Magda and Annie and Katie are presenting, because of our limited time, we're not going to have a proper Q&A session, but we do want you to put your questions into the chat. And how that needs to work so we don't get the side dialogue happening is if you can refrain from answering other people's questions. So you're going to see all of these questions pop into the chat, refrain from answering them and just let them sit there, and Magda's going to share with us later how we can attend to those questions. To begin, I would like to invite all of us to do a little exercise. So those of you, a lot of you have just not showing your video, so I hope you are able to come into this little exercise fully. But we're going to have a little reflection, which is to see where our current thinking and feelings about urban development in the Nelson Tasman region is at. And to do this, here we go. Sorry, here we go. Excellent, thank you, Magda. So Magda's just put up a slide with a little QR code, which you can use with your phone, or alternatively, you can just grab that website, menti.com, and pop it into a browser. And what will happen when you do that is that there's going to be 3 opportunities to put in a word. And if you could put in a word, as it says, that speaks to the quality or character of urban development that we see happening around us in the Nelson Tasman region currently. And as you do that, we're going to start seeing some words pop up. So there we've got some interesting ones popping up already. Homogeneous, hopeful, slow, tired, sleepy, sprawl, retail. You can see some positive ones in there as well. Potential, fledgling, hopeful. A real mixture coming up. Oh, wow, wrong. Gray, dead. Amazing. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. Magda, are we able to take this down briefly while the words are all coming in and pop it up again in just a moment? We can do that. Excellent. Okay. Now you can take a screenshot of this when Magda pops it up again, so it could be quite a nice thing to reflect on at the end. So now I'd like to invite you all to take a moment to reflect individually. You might even want to close your eyes if that helps. And I'd like you to think about some examples of human-built environments that support natural life processes. And you can put some examples of this into the chat. So I always love to think of Machu Picchu in South America, where you have that beautiful example. It's ancient architecture, if you like, of where the dwellings have been actually cut into the mountaintop. And it's just a stunning example of integrated architecture, human dwelling with nature. But you will have a lot of examples potentially that come to mind. And if you just pop some of those into the chat, we're going to start to see some examples of where we see this complementary relationship starting to happen. Fabulous. And while those are just coming up, I'm going to go into a bit of a definition of regenerative development. Something that Magda asked me to do in support of the presentations today was to share the definition of regenerative development. Being regenerative or regeneration is a word that we're seeing pop up in all kinds of contexts, and it doesn't take long to realize that depending on that context, this can actually mean quite different things. So for the sake of clarity, we want to share with you our use of the word regenerative and what its meaning is in this webinar. And to illustrate this, I'm just going to share a slide with you. So just give me a moment as I pop this up. And I'm just going to leave that top showing there because that gives the credit for this image. It's called Trajectory of Ecological Design by Bill Reed at Regeneration. So this is Bill's work, and my commentary is basically his. And so I want to give full credit to Bill for this. I'll just bring back the other window that I need. Thank you. So, so when you look at this image, you see this line moving from, left to right, moving from this gradient of red through to the gradient of green. And what we see down at this red end is that this is where conventional design begins, where our building and our planning standards are basically one step better than breaking the law, as Phil says. And then we come up with a number of different green building standards. So as you're moving from that left to right, moving from the dark red through to the lighter red, and this is basically where we create less damage, which is of course very important. And what green building is saying is that we can say do 50 to 70% better than we did before in terms of carbon emissions, toxic waste, water management, etc. But what that does mean is that we're actually still creating significant harm to our environment. And as some would say, this is actually just a slower way to die. And we are actually destroying life, and that these harms continue to add up at a very alarming rate. The assumption is that at some point we can actually get to zero harm. And that's the midpoint in this image. And we start to hit this mark. And this is what we think we can call sustainable. And the issue with this is that in our current situation globally, even if we don't increase harm to life and biodiversity, so much harm has been done already that we're still in a place where sustainability practices are not really sustaining life at all. We are actually still maintaining a system that is already in decline. So the opportunity that we have, and also the challenge, is how we can move to a place where we are beginning to restore life. And that's where you see it starting to move into that green radiant. And the opportunity, but also the challenge with this is that we need to not only restore life, but we need to look at how we can regenerate our relationship with life. And the reason why we're highlighting this is that as you can go, we know we can go and restore a forest, a water system, we can bring it back to health with an enormous amount of effort and attention and care over a period of time. But if our relationship with these living systems has not been regenerated, then we will very soon go back to destroying life. And basically what this means is that, when we look at regeneration, this is when the living systems are actually reproducing life again and again and again. And for this to happen, that relationship with nature needs to change. And that is the wholesale paradigm shift or a deep cultural shift in our relationship with the rest of the living world. And an example of this is, for example, if you do, after 10 years of restoring some part of a living system, and let's say a shopping mall is about to go up again, and we've forgotten why we wanted to restore that piece of nature in the first place, we start to get back into this relationship of bargaining with nature. And we think we can take back this bit of forest or take back this bit of wetland. And we forget the reason why or what the purpose of that piece of nature was actually serving to the wider system. And we imagine that we can take those pieces and that we can mitigate that impact somewhere else. And following that pattern, we quickly find ourselves back in a cycle of harming our natural systems of life. I'll just stop sharing that. There we go. So Chris Firkins, a notable Kiwi ecologist working with communities to bring about regeneration, often points out that the nature of nature is to regenerate. And we noticed in the big lockdowns of 2020 how quickly that the air cleared and bird life and sea life began to thrive again. And that was particularly in the absence of transport-related harm. And Chris points out that that nature will do 90% of its regeneration if we simply allow it to do so. And so what the question then becomes is, what is the key 10% that we need to do to support this to happen? And regeneration is literally when the spontaneous reproduction begins to occur. And all we need to do, is to learn to support the systems of nature in our urban planning, and in the doing, embed that learning into our culture of how we think about our places and how we see ourselves and our work. Human beings are not something separate to nature, but inherently have the potential to be powerful stewards in our planet's health. And this is where our work in the built environment, as built environment and community developers becomes and can become an exciting and evolutionary creative effort. And it's on this note that I'd like to provide a definition for urban regeneration in the context of our webinar today. So this is not some internationally agreed definition, but it's what we're going to use today to support our conversations. So I'm just going to pop this up on the screen again. So I'm juggling windows here. Can we see this? Is that clear now? So the definition we're using today is that we're working to improve our urban development practices to the point where they integrate with the local ecosystems and become a natural part of increasing biodiversity and nourishing to human relationships and creative expression. And just before I hand over to Magda, if you'd like to research the regenerative approach that Magda and I are speaking to today, please check out the Regenesis Group website for more information with the opportunity to join our learning series. And I'll pop that in the website in the chat in just a moment. And there's plenty of free videos as well as written resources that you can engage with. And I'd also recommend their Vimeo channel. And you can see there some seminars that have been particularly hosted for the New Zealand context. And I'll put that link in the chat as well. So Magda, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Kia ora, Damaris. So I would like to bring us back into our beautiful Nelson Tasman region. And first, maybe briefly about our Nelson Tasman 2050 group. So we are all local residents passionate about the future of our region. We are built environment professionals with real-world experience in urban design. We are, at the moment, 2 architecture professionals, 1 urban designer and a civil engineer, and the group is currently growing with members with experience in planning and sustainable development as well. We formed this group with the ambition to advocate for best practice urban planning in the region, and we undertake this work on a volunteer basis. Our aim is to use our professional experience to support Council, the development sector, and the community in achieving high quality and tangible improvements in our built environment. And really, we want to do this because we deeply believe that the Nelson Tasman region has potential to become Aotearoa's most vibrant and livable region with the country's smallest environmental footprint. And I mean, in theory, the region really has it all: the stunning natural landscapes, the diverse geography ranging from golden beaches to the forests to rivers and mountains. It's also a region that is fueled by creative energy and smart businesses, both in the city and rural areas. We also have highly productive land close to where we live, which forms a sort of green belt or green crescent, more like bringing its nutrients to where we live and work. And I'm sure that those of you who live here would be able to identify many more characteristics of the region that make it really unique and worth protecting. Unfortunately, the current trajectory of development looks more like a sprawling infestation of grey roofs. We have large lifestyle block subdivisions that are eating into our productive land areas, and most dangerous of all are the sprawling subdivisions that we continue to see being developed, especially around Richmond. This over-reliance on greenfield development as the main form of development has really negative outcomes and long-term degenerative consequences. It prevents intensification and continues the model of sprawl. It creates a loss of our highly productive land, of our character and recreational rural areas. It lacks diverse housing options and alternative housing typologies. It's a developer model that contributes to housing unaffordability. It has significant infrastructure costs, both upfront and ongoing. It relies heavily on private transportation. In his webinar earlier this week, Paul Winton said that we are already the region with the highest amount of cars per capita. For 1,000 inhabitants, we actually have 1,000 cars. And so obviously it dramatically increases our carbon emissions as well. On the other hand, we also have uncontrolled backyard intensification that leads to poor quality public and private spaces with no outlooks or green spaces, and what is known as low maintenance sections, which basically means concrete everywhere. And so besides lacking green space or privacy, this type of development increases the risk of flooding too. And it can lead to the sausage flat situation, which is not only undesirable, but also creates a dead end in terms of future development, because it's very hard to then increase density any further. The other challenges we are facing is that instead of having vibrant and dynamic centers, we have Nelson City Centre, which has a beautiful urban fabric with all the right parameters to become active, livable, and vibrant. But unfortunately, the heart of the place is car parks. And then we have the pumping heart of Richmond, a shopping mall. And so this is really where we see the interconnected nature of development. We have urban sprawl that leads to underdeveloped urban areas, which leads to fewer housing options for those who work in the city, which leads to fewer inhabitants. We currently have less than 100 inhabitants in Nelson City Centre, which leads to unlivable at dead centers and potentially leads to justifying more urban sprawl. And this is a very degenerative path of development. So how do we revert this trend? In short, we need a deep, deep change. And we believe that to start this, we need to constrain urban sprawl and minimize backyard infill. We need to create design guides for livable medium density that reflect the uniqueness of the region and of its people. And we also propose the creation of a Nelson Tasman Urban Development Agency, a UDA, to partner with public and private entities to deliver large-scale transformative projects and also smaller site-specific interventions. And we need to ensure that future development follows principles of quality intensification. Quality intensification is not always fully understood and is often reduced to matters of only density or only housing supply. So in order to capture what we mean when we talk about quality intensification, Nelson Tasman 2050 have identified 6 guiding principles that we believe should underpin any intensification strategy. So let's start with community. Community really should be at the heart of any development, whether it's papakainga, co-housing, or other community-led developments. It is essential that these types of developments are encouraged and supported as they best cater to the needs of our communities. It's also an opportunity to reclaim our streets and redefine them as green open spaces that contribute to making connections and to well-being. Increasing density does not mean building more of the same houses. It actually means redefining typologies with a more efficient use of space, with smaller footprints and less reliance on cars. There is sometimes stigma attached to higher density living and bad examples of infill housing, unfortunately. And we really believe that it is the council's role and duty to show that medium density living has not only many faces, but also a lot more advantages than the homogeneous developer-led sprawl that that eats away our landscapes. And that brings me to the next principle of diversity. So nature thrives in diversity, and actually our urban environments do too. Our household models are changing and evolving, and so should our building options. We need to provide housing that reflects the diversities of our communities in terms of culture, age, socioeconomic backgrounds. And we know that diversity is a major activator of towns and cities. Accessibility simply means that good development cannot happen when people need to take their cars to buy bread or to bring their children to school. So we need to prioritize walking and cycling as the main mode of transport and make sure that all daily activities are accessible within a 15-minute walk or cycle from home. Sustainability is an obvious one, but really needs to be considered at a high level. We are at a time when we desperately need housing that is built with low carbon materials, smaller footprints, and in genuine alignment with our carbon budget and carbon zero targets. If councils do not set those guidelines now, there will be no drive for developers to change their ways, and we'll continue to see more of the same infrastructure and carbon hungry sprawl. And finally, affordability, another obvious and essential principle, needs to be considered at the strategic level too. There are many opportunities, particularly around prefabrication, that could benefit local businesses, as well as lower overall housing costs, and the obvious smaller but better designs. So this is a really high-level overview of why our current development model is degenerative and how we actually have the potential to create an alternative regenerative one. So our actions, we are talking about the Climate Action Week. So our actions at Nelson Tasman 2050 are to advocate for regenerative developments through publishing newspaper articles and opinion pieces. We're doing meetings with council staff and elected officials. We attend public meetings and workshops. We're doing a lot of community presentations. We're doing a lot of submissions to councils, and they know about us. We create public submission guides, pre-election questionnaires for council candidates. We are currently working on alternative to medium density standards. We are also developing and pitching policy proposals to council, and we are currently working on a variety of case studies. But of course, this scale of change will not happen all at once, and it is really a long process. So I think it's really important to cultivate hope and vision, and to focus on projects that have that regenerative potential in them. And there are actually many of them in the region, and they don't have to be big. I think that incremental change is a fundamental part of regenerative processes, and that small interconnected regenerative projects actually have the capacity to positively impact a whole region and a whole living system of a region. And so this really brings me to the next presentation by Annie and Katie, which is, in my view, a great example of a deeply regenerative and small-scale project. Thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Magda. Sorry, I'm having a technical failure, of course. Here we go. Back to it. Kia ora koutou katoa, ko eni toku ingoa.
Ko kei te ahau.
And together we are the Free Range Arts Collective. Thank you so much to Magda, Joanna and Damaris for having us here today. It's really exciting to have this opportunity to share our project. And yes, we are the Free Range Arts Collective, and we believe in arts for everyone, accessible to all, and most importantly, the power of arts to improve our collective well-being. And so we see art as a tool for intervention. Our project is one that responds to our uncertain times, and it is going to be a tool for well-being. It's transformative on a personal level as well as collectively, and for our city, it is getting us into positive action. And maybe most importantly, it takes art out of the white cube of the gallery space, and into the public space so that it is accessible and inclusive for all. And our project, Heartwood, was inspired by a shared experience. And if you could go back one more time, the picture that you see here, this is an art project that happened in Malibu in 2020, and it is called Dig a Hole. It was this artist, Cara Levine, digging a hole for collective grief, responding to the COVID pandemic and the lockdown and just the fear and worry that came with that. And she dug a hole for the world to pour their grief into it. And we really like this, but we thought there needs to be another step. We don't want to be stuck with the grief. We need to release trauma, and we want to grow some hope, which brings us to our project, Heartwood. Dig a hole, plant a tree, grow some hope.
So Heartwood is an urban forest sculpture that weaves together strands of art, well-being and sustainability. It is designed with microforest principles using the Miyawaki method. And the aim is to create a soft contemplative space in our urban environment that fosters empathy, healing, and hope. As Annie said, we would like it to be in the center of a city, so it is accessible to all, and that it really is responding to these uncertain times that we are all living through. And, you know, we all experiencing loss in terms of health with the pandemic, and experiencing the loss of habitat with climate change. And the project aims to bring people together through these positive action that puts a living art form at the heart of urban well-being.
So again, dig a hole, plant a tree, grow some hope. So what is Heartwood? It is a living forest sculpture. So we are intending to plant a forest in the middle of Nelson. And we recognize that by creating a public sculpture like this, and by doing it collectively, we are bringing people together for transformative action and to connect our community with our place. It's going to be a ritual, a place for contemplation and transformation, and it's going to be unique to our place here in Whakatū.
So a little bit about the urban forest or microforest. I'm sure there are people listening today who are familiar with the Miyawaki method. There are examples of this happening already in Nelson, in Innisbrook, and in Atawhai. The beauty of using this open source information around creating an urban forest is that we can plant a tree forest in a very small space. It can be like 30 square meters, which is like 3 car parks worth. It creates, because the plantings are so close together, we can create a forest within a 20 to 30 year period. So the outcomes are very focused around well-being and sustainability. It brings in biodiversity within the city. It can be, and this is our hope and dream, is that we make something together with the community that is has all the local knowledge around what trees we want to plant and how we want to use it. and it brings in this participatory element to the design of where the forest could be. So how are we doing this?
So we are right in the middle of our community engagement and co-design process, where we are reaching out to different members of the community, starting with Mana Whenua, to find the right site, identify the right trees, native trees, very importantly, that thrive in our unique climate here in Whakatū and in the region, and that will be able to be planted within this method. So there's a lot of research involved. And then the goal is that we will bring our community together to plant the nursery forest and watch it grow together. It's an ongoing kaitiaki role in the community.
So we started this process back in 2021. We applied for a grant with the Manatū Taonga to Urangi Innovation Fund, and then brought the idea to the Nelson City Council through their spatial plan. It was adopted within the spatial plan, and really last year was all about initiating the conversation with Mana Whenua. We presented it to both the environmental group and the art group. And because it has this relationship with breaking ground, we felt like that was very important to let our intentions be known to Mana Whenua, so that when we get to the design process, that they can start inputting into it. This year has been about negotiating a site with Nelson City Council. With any community engagement, we've just realized it takes a long time.
Community-led development is a slow one.
But we really feel like this is really important, because that builds the uniqueness to what this project could bring to our city.
And we think about it that the time that it takes for us, that we, to be honest, didn't expect how slow it is, but we feel that we're putting down strong roots for this project to grow through taking this time. So
our aspirations is really about building green spaces for the future. It is very much acting locally, but thinking globally. We've called it Heartwood because we believe that we need to honor our emotions, but also find ways that we can move through loss and into this kind of the positive ethics of joy and hope. Our dream is that we create a piece of art that can be replicated anywhere. And we would love to be able to support other communities to create their own Heartwood in their own cities.
Yeah. So the idea is that all this research and engagement and we are currently doing, and the learnings we are taking from this journey will be shared online as a freely accessible resource for others to replicate and plant their own Heartwood. And that's us.
Thank you, Katie and Annie. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I did see one question that popped up in the chat that maybe you two could answer, which is, can you please explain the difference between what makes this just a regular planting and an art project?
Yeah, so it is that for us, we are inspired by getting information from the community to help and create a living work that is informing the design process. So it is about kind of getting input from a whole lot of different people about how the site would be used and what they would like to see. I guess we're very influenced by Oliver Ellison, who sees kind of the way that art could be actually used to kind of transform the places that we live in.
and it, sorry to jump in, but I think it brings it back to the intention as well. So what is I guess you can always argue what is an artwork, and we really strongly believe that art is not just a painting that you put on the wall, or a beautiful vase, or a theater piece that you go see, but art is something that is created with an intention. And that triggers a response or a reaction and an experience. So it makes it the intention to create this microforest as a sculpture is what makes it an artwork.
Yeah, and it's putting emphasis into that design process.
Thank you, Katie.
Great question. Thank you.
It's a very good question, and it does invite us to actually think about all of our urban planning projects in a new way, because in that sense, that intentionality of bringing so many people together to express something that's deeper than just the functional, but that it's actually creating a sense of relationship around what we build, which is actually at the heart of what regenerative development means. Just one comment I'd like to make before we go on to our next piece of interactive time together is just to make a comment on one of the challenges that we have in facing climate change is that there's so many different ways that humans are responding. And there is a lack of ability to make a global or even national cohesive plan to respond, mitigate, just halt what is happening. And there are many heroic individuals and groups that are trying to come up with the best and most effective way to respond. And of course, many of these are excellent ideas, but whose plan are we following? What is the priority? We can't follow everyone's plans, and because they're all in different orders and have different priorities. So how can we win on this? And in short, what we do in regenerative development is that we don't follow human plans, but we actually look to nature herself. And it is in all of her unique expressions that we find the blueprint of how we need to adapt. And what you can see is that if all of us began to look to nature as the blueprint for our developments, and we honored her way of doing things, and uniquely in each of our places, eventually all of our projects would begin to connect up like the dots on the map that Magda showed us. And instead of sitting on the precipice of a climate change tipping point, we could create a regeneration tipping point when suddenly the forces of nature would begin to align and we would see rapid, powerful, and evolutionary transformation. We don't actually need to look to governments and other leaders to give us this blueprint for action, but rather we look to nature herself. And the beauty of what you've shared, Katie and Annie, is if you do this in this place, and then the next community does something that honors the unique pattern of nature in their place, and the next place, and the next place, we will get that joining up effect, and we can create that regenerative tipping point. So on that note, I'd like us to actually go into breakout rooms for about 10 minutes and like to invite all of you to consider what might be the outcome. And I'm going to put this question into our chat just as I do it. Sending it to everyone. Here we go. What might be the outcome if your current project was aligned with the unique environmental system of the place within which it is situated? What might be the outcome? And to help with this, you might like to think about how the natural water systems flow in this place, or what purpose do the plants, animals, and bird life serve in this place? But what difference would it make? And what might be the effect on human communities if these natural systems were honored by design? And I'm going to pop everybody out into breakout rooms. You'll have exactly 10 minutes to chat about this together. And if you can either do a screenshot of that or copy and paste that into a note on a side document, because I'm not sure if the chat will continue when you go into your breakout rooms. But I'd really like to invite you to really get down into this and consider what shift we might be able to attain. Here we go.
Damaris,
Yes.
I'm just moving people a little bit because there are some rooms where it looks like there are not many people.
Person, yeah.
Or one person. Yeah.
I'm going to move 8 to 9. And I'm moving 11 to 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna join the room as well.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think we'll just have a few people trickling in over the next 30 seconds. Here we go.
That was quick.
Cut you short by a minute, I'm sorry. Fabulous. I think we've got everybody back now. Maybe not quite. Maybe we lost a few during the breakouts. Anyway, to wrap up, I hope you found that beneficial, just to be able to share with one another some of the thinking that you've been developing over this session. And it would be fabulous, Magda, if you could wrap us up. And I know we've got one more word cloud to do. Over to you, Magda.
Yes, I do that. Just bear with me while I share the screen. Here we go. Can you all see this? Yep. So I thought that maybe before we close off the webinar, we'd like to ask you to write down a specific area that you would really like to see being regenerated in a region. And while this is happening, I think it's I just wanted to remind that we will be collecting all the information and the questions and the comments and you know, all of the things that you have been contributed during this webinar. And we'll prepare a follow-up response that we will share with you, either maybe through the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum networks or the NT 2050 networks. We really need, you know, all sorts of projects of all sorts of various scales that are really anchored in place and nested within these wider living systems that we've been talking about, and that draw from the very unique character and essence of this region. And there are really lots of examples. And I think it's, you know, we often think about regeneration as this really big scale, kind of high level thing that needs to be, you know, where we need a lot of people working together to make it happen. And that's true, that's definitely true, but we can also start with a lot of little regenerative projects here and there, and they're not always all physical. A lot of kind of community development projects are really deeply regenerative. So I think it's a really great exercise to start saying, you know, the work that you are all doing, and I know that, you know, I know some of you are doing actually really wonderful regenerative work, but to really see it as a part of that wider system of all of us, you know, doing regenerative work in the region, and really try to influence that change. Yeah, great to see. Inner city, transport to and fro, Nelson car parks, Richmond. Yep, I definitely agree. Saltwater Creek. Yeah, I thought I would write that one, but yeah, definitely. Listening to Rangitahi. Excellent. So thank you so much. Thank you, Joanna, and the whole team at the Climate Forum. Thank you to Damaris, Annie, and Katie for being available and keen to co-create this webinar. And thank you to you all for being here. And I'll pass it back to Joanna for a closing karakia. Kakite.
Well, thank you, Magda, for putting together a really wonderful and highly stimulating array of thinking. I'm most grateful. I'll close with a karakia with an image of our working together and completing a little part of what we do together. Ko te hā, ko te rā, ko tangaroa, ko te mana, ko te kotahitanga, ko te mātāwaka. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e.